Welcome, fellow hacks. I'm Joe DeLeone, the biggest hack in college football, giving you thoughts on week 4 of the games that happened across the country in the college football landscape. So, we talked a little bit yesterday with a live reaction to a majority of the earlier games that happened, particularly Tennessee versus Florida. We talked a lot about the Clemson Wake Forest game and how that impacts the landscape of things for the college football playoff. Spoke very highly of Kansas, who we're actually going to get to a little bit today. And then a lot of other things that we covered, especially the Miami news and everything that happened with that. If you missed that, go check that out. Today, we have other games that we're going to recap, talking about Texas A&M beating Arkansas, talking about USC barely beating Oregon State, Oklahoma blowing it against Kansas State. And then I want to get to Oregon's comeback. The big thing that we have to open up with here today, news breaks that Geoff Collins, who is the head coach, previously was the head coach at Georgia Tech, is no longer the head coach for the Yellow Jackets. They just announced today, I believe it was a couple hours ago, maybe even less than that they are firing Collins and they are moving in another direction. They have had a very underwhelming tenure in his career, his time leading that program, and all it really took was a 1-3 start, embarrassing game against Clemson. And then most recently, the loss that put the nail in the coffin was the loss that they had against UCF this past weekend. So first off, not surprising that Geoff Collins was fired. He was the next expected guy that was going to lose his job. Everybody was anticipating that Collins was not going to be making it to the end of this season. However, it now opens up the conversation of who the hell are they going to hire? Who is Georgia Tech going to go with? Apparently, they're also firing their athletic director. So this process is going to be very long. This is going to be a complicated process. And I wouldn't be shocked if that decision, whoever they decide to hire, isn't done with an intention. I'm specifically talking about the athletic director, isn't done with the intention to lure another coach from a smaller program to come there. And on the flip side of that, whichever athletic director they hire, which is going to likely come from a group of 5 school, maybe one of these Sun Belt teams, that they don't just bring over the head coach that they previously had there. I am not privy to the athletic director landscape. However, I've got options here that very well could take over and lead the direction for Georgia Tech and help elevate that program in the future. Now, Collins came from Temple, and I think that for them to succeed, they need to look at what is one of the strongest conferences right now in terms of competitiveness and in terms of quality of play. I look at the Sun Belt. You're not going to be, if you're Georgia Tech, you're not a big name program. You're not even in one of the biggest conferences in the ACC. It's one of the weaker Power 5 conferences. I think we can all agree on that. You're not going to be able to pull somebody away, an offensive coordinator from a big program like Todd Monken from Georgia, I think is unlikely. I feel like Todd Monken, if Dan Lanning can get an Oregon job, he is capable of getting a better job than Georgia Tech. So if they want to get somebody who is going to be a spark for this program, look at a lot of the programs in the Sun Belt that are producing success. So the top 2 that I think need to be discussed the most are Sean Clark from App State, who has made that team really fun to watch. We saw what they did against Texas A&M. Now I know that they lost this past weekend to James Madison, but App State over the past couple years under Sean Clark has been really, really competitive, very, very strong at developing players on that roster, and they've been very effective at recruiting guys in the portal, which is an underrated thing for a group of 5 school, and something that if you're Georgia Tech, you now need to get better at is getting guys from the transfer portal, because you're likely not going to get 4-star recruits, 5-star recruits to come to Georgia Tech. Instead, you're going to want to maybe steal some guys that are deciding to leave other programs. That is usually where all these other teams, all these mid-level teams have been able to develop. I also look at Jamie Chadwell from Coastal Carolina, who is always going to be brought up as a candidate for any of these coaching openings that aren't big programs. It's very unlikely that a massive program with an opening is going to go after Jamie Chadwell. I think Auburn might be on the table for him, but Jamie Chadwell makes perfect sense for this Georgia Tech job. And they run a lot of option type plays in that offense. And we get a little bit of a backtrack here of them going with Jamie Chadwell after Collins tried to move that Georgia Tech team away from being an option team. But Chadwell makes a lot of sense. And then the last one, who I think is going to get a lot of buzz, is Tyson Helton at Western Kentucky. Clay Helton's brother, I think, is the relation there. Tyson Helton, Western Kentucky, we saw what they did last year, all the statistics and records that they broke with Bailey Zappi leading the way. And right now this year, they don't look equally as good, but they still look really competitive. Going and getting Tyson Helton, I think, would lead this Georgia Tech team in a positive direction. So, to summarize, Georgia Tech needs to go after one of these top programs, coaches at the group of 5 level. That is what is going to help lead to success. I have to reiterate this before we get into talking about some of the headlines from the games this past weekend. Deion Sanders is not going to leave Jackson State for a Georgia Tech job or a similar job. He has, and if you paid attention to the Jackson State football program, has made a lot of concessions and given up a lot of things to give back to that community and to that program. Deion Sanders is very invested in building up an HBCU program. He is very invested in turning Jackson State into a competitive football team. He is not going to leave that situation with unfinished business unless it is for a high-level job. Now, if Auburn calls him after they likely fire Brian Harsin, if Auburn calls him, that's a job that Deion Sanders leaves for. Right now, it doesn't look like Florida State's going to open up. That's one of the few other ones I would consider. But right now, the only jobs that make sense for Deion Sanders to leave is a big SEC program, a big Big Ten program, a bigger to one of the top ACC programs. He's not going to leave Jackson State to go to Georgia Tech. His name is going to get brought up so much in the cycle, and I've seen so many people bring him up before this firing happened as a possible candidate for this job. And it is just not going to happen based on, if you watch and see and even listen to how he talks about that program and how much he wants to elevate that team and bring up the area around that program. Why would he leave to go to a Georgia Tech team that has been relatively hard to win at recently? I just don't see that happening. All right, let's talk about these games this past weekend that I didn't get to on yesterday's live stream. First one, and I was watching this game really closely. I was at a bar in Los Angeles with embedded with some USC fans, and this game was really nerve-wracking to watch because USC had so many opportunities and so many reasons to pull away and put points on the board. The one thing that stood out the most, and I know that they won this game, is that their offensive line is very problematic, which is weird because they have some decent players on that offensive line. It is very bare bones. It is a very weak group. And what we saw in this game, Caleb Williams did not get sacked that many times. And I'm sure if you pull up the statistics, I don't have them off the top of my head, his total pressures probably isn't that high. But during this game, Caleb Williams, a master of maneuverability and escaping the pocket and moving and throwing on the run and picking up extra yards. He was under duress the entirety of this game. And props to the run game and Travis Dye for making the plays that they did with, a very difficult circumstance. But that offensive line is going to be the death of them in an important game. And maybe that's the Utah game. That's the game right now that looks to be the most difficult matchup that they have coming up. Washington State is also going to be a very difficult matchup, and they were able to force and fluster Bo Nix a little bit despite losing that game. We're going to talk about that at the end of this stream. They are in a really difficult spot with that offensive line. I had concerns, but after watching what they did against Oregon State, just barely holding on and pulling back in at the end of that game, that offensive line is not going to cut it for them to win a Pac-12 championship and for them to possibly make it to the college football playoff. This team is a year away, and they're effectively doing really good in recruiting. They're going to bring in really talented 5-star guys to build up that offensive line, but it doesn't happen overnight. Offensive line is one of the most complicated positions to develop and to build and bolster. You are not going to just get a good offensive line. It's even hard to get guys in the transfer portal. Not a lot of guys enter the transfer portal that are elite level to above average level quality guys. There's just a scarcity of those types of players. It is very rare that they will enter the portal, and they will usually only enter if they are disgruntled with their situation and they're not playing, and there's usually a reason for that. But when you bring in freshmen, they have to usually add weight. They need to work on their technique. Offensive linemen are always one of the most raw position groups on any roster. The other thing, too, that I just want to talk about with this USC team, there was a lot of talk about that defense being a concern. And I got to say, that defense looked way better than everyone was talking about them to be, because Oregon State's offense has some capabilities to really pop. Chance Nolan is one of the better quarterbacks in the Pac-12, and he made some nice plays. But their secondary, USC secondary, stepped up. And I know that Nolan made a lot of forced throws on those interceptions that he threw, but they made some serious plays. I forget the name of the exact corner who made that one almost over-the-shoulder catch interception, but that is an example of how ready and prepared they were to step up for the occasion. I said this going into the game, I was concerned about that defense and that secondary. They silenced me, and they should silence a lot more people based on how they played, how well they defended the entirety of that game. But the big important thing is forcing turnovers. That's how you win football games, is forcing turnovers. I'm not necessarily out on USC after nearly losing this game, because Oregon State's really good. They're a really good team. They're probably going to finish with like 2 to 3 losses at the end of the year. But I'm not willing to make that commitment to them being college football playoff Pac-12 winning team, as I think a lot of people are doing and still are consistently going to be doing. I think a lot of more people are coming down to earth after watching the way that they played against Oregon State. So Arkansas completely fumbled, though, a easy opportunity to get a quality win on their resume. Not a great win, but a quality win on their resume. They came out of the gate swinging with multiple huge plays to go up 14-0. And if you have not seen the replay of this game, I implore you to please go watch it for this one play in particular. And if you did watch it, you know the play that I'm talking about, where KJ Jefferson was really short of the end zone in a goal-to-go situation, dove, fumbled the ball, and a scoop and score ensued, in which the ball was tossed to another defender when the original scoop and scorer was about to be tackled, and Antonio Johnson catches that ball and runs it back for a 99-yard touchdown. I looked back and I rewatched the highlights of this game. It's kind of like rewatching a movie to get a better understanding of what the hell happened in that game, because it was really mind-boggling to me, because they were actually moving the ball decently well. They were making a lot of plays on defense. And that play, I have come to this determination, was a total fluke play, a really stupid mistake. And that's why Texas A&M won, was that play alone. They weren't offensively doing anything. Like, Devin Achane popped off a bunch of really nice runs, and he had that one really long one that set up them for a scoring opportunity. Besides that, like, Max Johnson didn't really do anything. Like, Max Johnson was just keeping that team afloat and in the game at a level that they needed to be for them to, maintain a lead that they were at that point in the game. They didn't look very competent, Texas A&M, at all. It was all that one play that gave them the lead. And Arkansas, the rest of the game, after they lost all of their momentum after that play, was them trying to get back in it. And they did it at the end of the game. And if it wasn't for another crazy play like the fumble recovery, the ball bouncing off the top of the goalpost on a game-winning field goal attempt, Arkansas would have won that football game. It just sucks because, like, in the world of the SEC, one early loss is enough to completely take you out of contention. Like, that's all it takes. I'm not down on Arkansas, and I think that Arkansas is one of those programs and one of those teams this year that is going to like upset somebody unexpected. They don't play Tennessee this year, so that's not really on the table. But they have the capability. They've got the rushing offense. KJ Jefferson's really good, one of the better SEC quarterbacks, and defensively they're good enough. Once you get Andrew Catalon back, if he even is able to come back, to just upset someone. I don't know if that's possibly Alabama. I don't think that's likely, or Georgia. They are just capable of shocking somebody and maybe finishing with a couple of losses, like 2 losses. I think that's the ceiling for that Arkansas team if they play mistake-free, which they did not against Texas A&M. Oklahoma, I think, is one of the bigger headlines that we need to get to after this weekend. They played like shit against Kansas State. They looked terrible against Kansas State. And like what was really confusing is that, like, if you go back and rewatch this one, you see all the big splash plays that Dillon Gabriel was able to create. And like those big long passes that were wide open receivers, huge chunk plays, long touchdowns. It doesn't feel like a blowout. And it's weird talking about Brent Venables having a really good offensive team and an incompetent defensive team. It's almost as if they're still reeling from, the losses of Lincoln Riley leaving and losing some pieces on that defense. But on top of that, having a roster that wasn't built to play very much defense at all. Brent Venables has to do a lot of recruiting to fix that defense right now, because that unit is very problematic. Adrian Martinez is not a good quarterback, and he didn't make any throws that put Kansas State in a position to win. He was running all over them. And to stop a mobile quarterback, which Adrian Martinez is a good athlete, but let's not act like he's Lamar Jackson. He's not a untackleable, if that's a word, quarterback like Lamar Jackson or Johnny Manziel. He's fast, he can move, but to give up the plays that were given up to him is embarrassing if you're Oklahoma's defense and if you're Brent Venables. That's a lack of effort. That's a lack of positioning. That's poor scheming to not set up your defense to get stops. Really, really pathetic that Adrian Martinez, who was a cast-off from Nebraska, that you gave up, those big plays, those huge long touchdown runs or runs that set up touchdowns, the fact that you gave those up to Adrian Martinez. So to be perfectly clear here, I don't think that Oklahoma is, from what we saw, a college football playoff team. Kansas State's good. They're a quality program, but to lose to them, you're not in a position to compete for a national championship. You're just not. And I had high hopes. I thought that at the end of the season that they were going to be the team after Texas lost. And I said this on the stream yesterday, assuming Oklahoma was going to win a game that they should have won if they played defense, that now that Texas was out of it because of a stupid loss, that Oklahoma was the next best favorite. And what we're seeing right now in the Big 12 is a collective eating of each other. That didn't come out the way that I wanted it to. Everyone is beating up on each other in the Big 12. They're eating themselves. We saw Baylor knock off a 3-0 Iowa State team. Kansas State loses last week, and now they knock off Oklahoma, who's the top team. Texas Tech then knocks off Texas, who I thought was capable of being in contention for a Big 12 championship game. Again, now I'm out on them. You've got all these teams eating up on each other. And the only team, and this is going to sound so goddamn ridiculous, and it's only because of the fact that, like, it's what we've seen so far and what we've seen right now. The only complete team that I have seen in the Big 12 is Kansas. I know that sounds ridiculous. I know that sounds obnoxious to say. But Kansas has played both sides of the football, and Jalen Daniels is a guy that you need at quarterback to lead your team to win the conference. It is going to be difficult in an uphill battle going up against other programs that recruited better and have higher rated recruits. But I am not taking it off the table for them to be competing for a Big 12 championship. I do not take that off the table at all. They have shown me so many positive signs. Their schedule so far has not been great. They beat Houston, they beat Duke, who Duke is a lot better than they've been previously. Mike Elko has prepared and brought up that Duke program, and they're a team that can do damage in the ACC. Houston, also quality program that they beat very handedly. They're throwing up tons of points in these games. They have 3 games where they scored over 40, and they almost were able to do that against Duke. I look at the remaining stretch of their schedule where the tests now lie. They have to beat Oklahoma. They have to beat Oklahoma State. I think just in pure outlook on the Big 12, the 2 teams that I think it really comes down to is what Oklahoma State does, and if Kansas can pull off the unlikely and finish out this season, finish out their schedule perfectly is what they're going to need. I feel that Jalen Daniels is that type of guy that can put a team on his back, as we've already seen, that can be a win because of type of player. I do want to see more from Oklahoma State, who, that first game that they had against Central Michigan, I want to pull up their schedule, confirm it. The first game they had against Central Michigan is what really scares me, because they gave up 44 points to Central Michigan, who is not a very good football program. Not a very good football program at all. They're a mediocre quality football program, and they gave up that many points to them. They narrowly beat Arizona State only by 17 points, and their only other win is against Arkansas Pine Bluff. So that's why I think it's not a reach to say that Kansas has proven more than any other Big 12 team. They have played quality opponents and within their conference in Houston, West Virginia, and Duke and Houston are not in their conference. But they have shown a lot of really good things that they can show up defensively. They can show up offensively. They can throw the ball all over the yard. They've got speed at every skill position offensively. They can make plays, and they can win in a shootout if necessary. I am looking forward to that game, though, that they have coming up on November 5th. That Kansas versus Oklahoma State matchup is going to be really fun. And I am hoping that Kansas, by that time, is still undefeated. Don't disrespect the action. Let's be real, Colin. Colin, we know that. Also, thanks for showing up at the beginning of the stream. Maction this year has not been good. I looked at the standings earlier, and it's just an underwhelming group across the board. The MAC used to be the best group of 5 conference, and the Sun Belt is running away with it. The MAC has seriously taken a step backward in terms of competitiveness and capability to upset teams like they previously were. I remember the days of watching like a ranked Northern Illinois or Kent State team put up like a ton of points, and they're just not the same conference that we're used to seeing. Last game that I have to shine a little bit of light on, and I know that Colin is going to really enjoy me bringing this game up, but the Oregon comeback, which I did not talk about on yesterday's stream, was I don't even have words to describe that comeback. It was magnificent. It was fantastic. I flipped that game off, and I just assumed that Washington State won that game. And I was thinking, the thoughts in my head were starting to formulate. Washington State might be legit. They've got the offensive prowess. Cam Ward is looking better and better each week. But Oregon's defense showed up in a way that I did not think that they were capable of showing up. Now, they gave up a lot of yards. They gave up a lot of big plays. They gave up a lot of points. Where they showed up was in key situations where they needed to make stops. That, to me, is a sign of a quality defense and a defense that can help you win football games. And I said this about Tennessee's defense yesterday against Florida. even when you're having a bad game, can you show up to turn the ball over, to make key plays in games when it's, a late stretch, when it's a shootout? Can you force that turnover? Can you get that big sack that is going to help you get your offense back on the field or close out a football game? And that is exactly what Oregon's defense did. They kept getting Oregon opportunities, and that offense opportunities to get back onto the field for them to climb back in it. And then at the very end of this game, Cam Ward throws an interception to Justin Flo, who goes into the end zone for a pick six. That is what you need from your defense. I think that defense is good enough to lead them to win a Pac-12 championship game. And I said that right now it comes down to, last show, to 3 teams. I think it's opened up to 4 with the way that Washington is playing. It's a battle between Washington, Utah, Oregon, and USC. I'm starting to doubt USC, and I'm a little bit higher on Oregon after them showing that they have the balls and the guts to come back into a game like the way that they did. I'm a lot higher on Oregon. I have crapped on Oregon way too much, and they deserve the credit where it is due, that they showed up and they were able to not give up in a game that they very easily could have just bent over and took it, which they did against Georgia. That was where my doubt was, is that Dan Lanning did not prepare his team to an extent where they looked like they gave up and they looked lifeless and dead. There was no fight to get back into the game for that first game for Oregon. But you now see that, and I think that this Oregon program is progressing in the right direction. Dan Lanning was 100% the correct hire after what I have seen over the past couple weeks, especially the BYU game and especially this game against Washington State. A lot of positive things coming from Oregon. All right, we've got a bunch of goofy comments from Colin. Anyone who's joining us and wants to drop a comment, thoughts on the week, we're just talking about reacting to anything that's come from week 4 of college football. Colin, you're saying Wazoo couged the game up in spectacular fashion. Yeah, it feels weird that they're not under Leach and they're doing stuff like that where they're putting up a lot of yards and a lot of points and then making a blunderous mistake at the end of the game. Also, I saw you said this earlier. And again, we've got a few viewers, anyone who wants to drop a comment, question in, feel free to. Rhode Island doesn't suck. I got to give them a little credit for hanging in on that game. I have to address something that was really hilarious that went undercovered. So apparently at the end of this game, Pitt scored a touchdown, and then on the ensuing extra point, Rhode Island roughed their kicker, Pitt's kicker. And the Pitt kicker was so upset that he went rogue and kicked an onside kick to himself and recovered it. The hilarity of that is just insane. And then there's a shot of him getting chewed out by his coach. But that is fantastic that happened. And I encourage anyone who has not found it, I might even post it on the channel. If you haven't seen that clip, go look for it on Twitter. It's hilarious that happened. I think that's going to be it for me. Solid 30 minutes talking about these games and the Geoff Collins firing. We'll be back with a preview episode for week 5. Will Sean show up? We have absolutely no idea. He was supposed to show up today. Did not show up today. It is like a Where's Waldo of Sean. It is what it is. Thanks for tuning in. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe. You know the drill. We'll be back for a week 5 preview very soon.